Next day I could not leave my bed. Heatherlegh told me in the morning that he had received an answer from Mr. Mannering, and that, thanks to his, Heatherlegh's, friendly offices, the story of my affliction had travelled through the length and breadth of Simla, where I was on all sides much pitied. "And that's rather more than you deserve," he concluded pleasantly, "though the Lord knows you've been going through a pretty severe mill. Never mind, we'll cure you yet, you perverse phenomenon." I declined firmly to be cured. "You've been much too good to me already, old man," said I, "but I don't think I need trouble you further." In my heart I knew that nothing Heatherlegh could do would lighten the burden that had been laid upon me. With that knowledge came also a sense of hopeless, impotent rebellion against the unreasonableness of it all. There were scores of men no better than I whose punishments had at least been reserved for another world, and I felt that it was bitterly, cruelly unfair that I alone should have been singled out for so hideous a fate. This mood would in time give place to another where it seemed that the rickshaw and I were the only realities in a world of shadows, that Kitty was a ghost, that Mannering, Heatherlegh, and all the other men and women I knew were all ghosts, and the great, grey hills themselves but vain shadows devised to torture me. From mood to mood I tossed backwards and forwards for 7 weary days, my body growing daily stronger and stronger, until the bed-room looking-glass told me that I had returned to everyday life, and was as other men once more. Curiously enough, my face showed no signs of the struggle I had gone through. It was pale indeed, but as expressionless and commonplace as ever. I had expected some permanent alteration, visible evidence of the disease that was eating me away. I found nothing. On the 15th of May I left Heatherlegh's house at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the instinct of the bachelor drove me to the club. There I found that every man knew my story as told by Heatherlegh, and was, in clumsy fashion, abnormally kind and attentive. Nevertheless I recognized that for the rest of my natural life I should be among, but not of, my fellows, and I envied very bitterly indeed the laughing coolies on the mall below. I lunched at the club, and at 4 o'clock wandered aimlessly down the mall in the vague hope of meeting Kitty. Close to the bandstand the black and white liveries joined me, and I heard Mrs. Wessington's old appeal at my side. I had been expecting this ever since I came out, and was only surprised at her delay. The phantom rickshaw and I went side by side along the Chota Simla road in silence. Close to the bazaar, Kitty and a man on horseback overtook and passed us. For any sign she gave I might have been a dog in the road. She did not even pay me the compliment of quickening her pace, though the rainy afternoon had served for an excuse. So Kitty and her companion, and I and my ghostly light o' love, crept round Jacko in couples. The road was streaming with water, the pines dripped like roof pipes on the rocks below, and the air was full of fine, driving rain. 2 or 3 times I found myself saying to myself almost aloud, "I'm Jack Pansy on leave at Simla, at Simla. Every day, ordinary Simla. I mustn't forget that, I mustn't forget that." Then I would try to recollect some of the gossip I had heard at the club, the prices of so-and-so's horses, anything, in fact, that related to the workaday Anglo-Indian world I knew so well. I even repeated the multiplication table rapidly to myself, to make quite sure that I was not taking leave of my senses. It gave me much comfort, and must have prevented my hearing Mrs. Wessington for a time. Once more I wearily climbed the convent slope and entered the level road. Here Kitty and the man started off at a canter, and I was left alone with Mrs. Wessington. "Agnes," said I, "will you put back your hood and tell me what it all means?" The hood dropped noiselessly and I was face to face with my dead and buried mistress. She was wearing the dress in which I had last seen her alive, carried the same tiny handkerchief in her right hand, and the same card case in her left. A woman 8 months dead with a card case. I had to pin myself down to the multiplication table, and to set both hands on the stone parapet of the road to assure myself that that at least was real. "Agnes," I repeated, "for pity's sake tell me what it all means." Mrs. Wessington leant forward, with that odd, quick turn of the head I used to know so well, and spoke. If my story had not already so madly overleaped the bounds of all human belief, I should apologize to you now. As I know that no one, no, not even Kitty, for whom it is written as some sort of justification of my conduct, will believe me, I will go on. Mrs. Wessington spoke, and I walked with her from the Sanjoli Road to the turning below the Commander-in-Chief's house as I might walk by the side of any living woman's rickshaw, deep in conversation. The second most tormenting of my moods of sickness had suddenly laid hold upon me, and like the prince in Tennyson's poem, I seemed to move amid a world of ghosts. There had been a garden party at the Commander-in-Chief's, and we too joined the crowd of homeward-bound folk. As I saw them then, it seemed that they were the shadows, impalpable fantastic shadows, that divided for Mrs. Wessington's rickshaw to pass through. What we said during the course of that weird interview I cannot, indeed, I dare not, tell. Heatherlegh's comment would have been a short laugh and a remark that I had been mashing a brain stomach chimera. It was a ghastly and yet in some indefinable way a marvelously dear experience. Could it be possible, I wondered, that I was in this life to woo a second time the woman I had killed by my own neglect and cruelty? I met Kitty on the homeward road, a shadow among shadows. If I were to describe all the incidents of the next fortnight in their order, my story would never come to an end, and your patience would be exhausted. Morning after morning and evening after evening the ghostly rickshaw and I used to wander through Simla together. Wherever I went, there the 4 black and white liveries followed me and bore me company to and from my hotel. At the theater I found them amid the crowd of yelling Japanese, outside the club veranda, after a long evening of whist, at the birthday ball, waiting patiently for my reappearance, and in broad daylight when I went calling. Save that it cast no shadow, the rickshaw was in every respect as real to look upon as one of wood and iron. More than once, indeed, I have had to check myself from warning some hard-riding friend against cantering over it. More than once I have walked down the Mall deep in conversation with Mrs. Wessington to the unspeakable amazement of the passers-by. Before I had been out and about a week I learnt that the fit theory had been discarded in favor of insanity. However, I made no change in my mode of life. I called, rode, and dined out as freely as ever. I had a passion for the society of my kind which I had never felt before. I hungered to be among the realities of life, and at the same time I felt vaguely unhappy when I had been separated too long from my ghostly companion. It would be almost impossible to describe my varying moods from the 15th of May up to today. The presence of the rickshaw filled me by turns with horror, blind fear, a dim sort of pleasure, and utter despair. I dared not leave Simla, and I knew that my stay there was killing me. I knew, moreover, that it was my destiny to die slowly and a little every day. My only anxiety was to get the penance over as quietly as might be. Alternately I hungered for a sight of Kitty and watched her outrageous flirtations with my successor, to speak more accurately, my successors, with amused interest. She was as much out of my life as I was out of hers. By day I wandered with Mrs. Wessington almost content. By night I implored heaven to let me return to the world as I used to know it. Above all these varying moods lay the sensation of dull, numbing wonder that the seen and the unseen should mingle so strangely on this earth to hound one poor soul to its grave. August 27th. Heatherlegh has been indefatigable in his attendance on me, and only yesterday told me that I ought to send in an application for sick leave. An application to escape the company of a phantom. A request that the government would graciously permit me to get rid of 5 ghosts and an airy rickshaw by going to England. Heatherlegh's proposition moved me to almost hysterical laughter. I told him that I should await the end quietly at Simla, and I am sure that the end is not far off. Believe me that I dread its advent more than any word can say, and I torture myself nightly with 1,000 speculations as to the manner of my death. Shall I die in my bed decently and as an English gentleman should die, or, in one last walk on the Mall, will my soul be wrenched from me to take its place for ever and ever by the side of that ghastly phantasm? Shall I return to my old lost allegiance in the next world, or shall I meet Agnes Lothinghearn bound to her side through all eternity? Shall we two hover over the scene of our lives till the end of time? As the day of my death draws nearer, the intense horror that all living flesh feels towards escaped spirits from beyond the grave grows more and more powerful. It is an awful thing to go down quick among the dead with scarcely one half of your life completed. It is 1,000 times more awful to wait as I do in your midst, for I know not what unimaginable terror. Pity me, at least on the score of my delusion, for I know you will never believe what I have written here. Yet as surely as ever a man was done to death by the powers of darkness, I am that man. In justice, too, pity her. For as surely as ever woman was killed by man, I killed Mrs. Wessington. And the last portion of my punishment is even now upon me.